So.
Oh, there's Andrew. We're live, by the way.
Okay.
I'm just updating. We're having a chat problem embedded. The chat embedded on the site isn't working, so y'all are smarter than me. You can go to the YouTube page to be able to chat. Sorry about that. I'm going to post an update. I prefer that you guys are able to chat so you can heckle Andrew.
Oh yeah, by all means, bring it.
A second. Sorry, I just want to get my water out of the fridge. They can only see you. How do I? Now they can see me.
You done this before, Ryan?
All right. We'll get started in just a minute. What do we got here? 27 people watching.
You're like in the dark over there. Where's your lights, man? Are you a vampire now?
I got a light right here. Right there.
Oh, okay.
You can see all my stuff back there. Try to keep it. I told my kid to tune in, so I gotta use my good language.
You told your kids to tune in?
I only have one.
Why would you do that? Well, as far as you know. Why would you do that?
That's a good question.
I mean, is it a punishment?
All right, flip over
Ryan.
to Andrew. Shift my camera here.
Ryan, are you punishing your child?
No, she likes CraftQuest. She has like CraftQuest shirts and stuff. Sure likes CraftQuest. All right.
I don't mean to break your heart on this one, but my kids don't care.
About anything you
do.
About
pretty much anything I do.
All right. Hey, everyone. Andrew and I are just talking to ourselves. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a second. I'm just kind of getting situated here. All right. Who wants one more viewer? Yeah, exactly. Okay, welcome to the live stream, everyone. Hey, Luke Holders. It's like a week from now in Australia, right? Isn't that how the time works?
Yeah, I don't even know when it is. It's in some random.
Good to see you, Luke. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, to the live stream. Today, I'm back with Andrew Welch. Hello, Andrew. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you doing, Ryan?
Hanging in there. We are getting together on this Friday to talk about local hosting and local hosting roundup, I'm calling it. Kind of just let's take a stock of the different hosting options that are out there for local hosting, and then we're going to dive into a couple of them. And I think Andrew has some plans to try to convince me that I should use Docker. Is that what you're up to?
I'm going to convince you to do things the right way, Ryan, whether you like it or not. No, so there is no right way, right? I mean, obviously we all have opinions going into it in terms of what we like. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to understand that, different developers have different needs, right? And different projects have different needs. So keep that in mind when we're talking about all this stuff, right?
Yeah. And what we want to do is try to... so I put out a poll yesterday, Andrew. I guess we should start there.
No, you know where we should start, Ryan?
We
should explain what the hell we're talking about. Like, what is local hosting? I don't even know what that is.
What is local hosting?
What? Am I becoming like my own little, ISP that I'm hosting shit? Like, what's going on?
Well, I mean...
Oh, wait, you said your kid was listening. Sorry.
It depends on... it depends. So the answer is local hosting is how we... So typically the way that we want to develop websites, whether we're applications or just building sites with Craft, is that we're doing it locally in our computer and not directly on a server somewhere. And because of that, we have to have some sort of server environment running because Craft runs PHP and needs a web server like Nginx or Apache. And so we have to have some sort of configuration to be able to do that in a way that will support the application and run it, and at least give us an idea that what we are building is going to run on a server somewhere. So, so that's my definition of local hosting. What's yours?
So I already messed up on the stream. You said your kid was listening, and I've cursed. So I lasted about.
I don't know if she is, dude.
I lasted about 60 seconds, so I apologize for that. And I think I might curse again. Oh, God. These restrictions. All right. So, I mean, to me, local hosting is the stuff that you have to do so you can do your work. You know what I mean? Like, for a lot of people, it really is just like this layer of crap that you don't really want to have to deal with, but you can't do your work until that is set up and ready to go. Because you need some kind of a environment in which you can develop your stuff and you have debugging tools available to you, and ideally it matches your production environment somewhat, so that there won't be surprises when this thing actually ends up getting deployed, But from a front-end developer's perspective, I kind of view local development as this annoying meta work that needs to get done and out of the way before I can do my actual work, and I don't know if anyone in the chat feels that way too. I've heard a decent number of people express that view where it's like, look, I just want to start doing my work. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time tweaking things and configuring things and all that kind of good stuff. Have you ever heard that sentiment, Ryan?
I hear that a lot. I actually hear that a lot about like modern tooling, but that's a completely different live stream.
Yeah.
But that's true. So I think that's when we go over the different local hosting, like you've broken these up into categories, and when we go over them, I think that some people just want to get in and have something that just works and not have to fiddle. And I'm totally in the like fiddling can come when the work is done or has some momentum. I don't think you should fiddle before you actually do the work. But
wouldn't it? I mean, it's funny actually to think of it in the context of other professions. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what if you were, I don't know, like a lawyer, and before you could go in and do any lawyering, like you had to do a whole bunch of like setup work that has nothing to do with lawyering. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Wouldn't that be weird? Wouldn't that be annoying?
I mean, like you have to like stock the sodas in the office fridge, and then you have to. I mean, it's stuff like honestly, like for like small business owners, it's actually kind of like a good analogy because it's a lot of stuff that they have to do, like owner operators.
Right.
They do a lot of they have to do fiddly stuff before they can get to the actual work. So they're actually working like in their business versus on their business is kind of like a saying. I think this is kind of the same thing. It's like, are you like, is your job to have some sort of special and ideal like local hosting thing that sort of is a little bit of a street cred signaling, or is it, or are you trying to just get the project going?
Right.
Because I've used everything from MAMP to Docker. Like that's sort of, if we're talking about the range that we're looking at. And I don't think how we're going to define this is like set in stone. I think you could approach this from all different ways. But let's get to the work. And that's where my pushback would be is like, don't fiddle too early. So
yeah, well, you experience it too, right? So to get the live stream up and running, like you have to do a whole bunch of nonsense to get it up and running, right?
What time? We started preparing an hour before. Yeah.
Right, and part of that is logistics, right? Which makes sense. Like we got to get on the same page, et cetera, et cetera. But you also recently you purchased Ecamm, right? To do this.
Yeah,
right?
We're using Ecamm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of did that for the same reasons, right? Because it automates a lot of the crap that you were used to doing before by hand, and it also gives you some capabilities you didn't have before. But more than anything, it lets you get on with just like doing the stream, doing the thing that you want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to some extent, that Ecamm is like your local development environment or your local environment or whatever for doing your live streams, So it's kind of like that too.
So
Jason H. Lee is saying, anyone hear the noise in the background? Sounds like the delete key accidentally pressed down. Bit of crackling.
Luke doesn't hear it. Jeremy. Oh, okay. Let me tweak our audio. Is it coming when I talk or when Andrew talks?
Andrew is talking just so we can test it.
All right. Luke keeps his volume very low because he's... All right, it's very faint. All right, we're going to roll.
I don't know what it is, but we're going to YOLO it. Right?
Yeah.
Do people still say YOLO, or am I just like totally dating myself by using that? Is that a thing? Or is that very like 2017?
I mean, I think dads say it, so yeah, sure.
Okay, so it's a dadism.
Yeah,
so I can
now
do it.
It is.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, Jalen says it's on all the time. So, I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know what to tell you. We should spend more time on our local streaming environment, Ryan.
We probably should. I wonder if they
Sounds
can
like
hear...
a helicopter in the distance. Wow. That's incredible.
Can they hear the
horn?
horn?
Should we get on with the show,
Yeah.
or do you want to try and figure it out?
Okay. Yeah, I hear something too. All right. Thanks everyone for your patience. We'll see how it turns out. This is being recorded, so if this is not a live stream related.
Well, here
thing,
I'm gonna mute myself real quick,
Okay.
and tell me if you can still hear it. We'll see if it's coming from my end.
We'll see if Andrew is the problem. You're still muted, Andrew. What are you saying about me? All right, I'm gonna bring up our.
All right. Did anyone still hear it during the time that I was muted?
Jay says sorry. No, Jay, I appreciate you letting us know. We want to make sure. Well, I'm not monitoring the audio as it goes. I'm monitoring the audio before it goes out, but not as it goes out. I don't hear anything here. So, so it's all good.
All right.
Thank you
So
for
he
that.
still hears it with Andrew muted. So we're just gonna blame you.
Okay.
And so then it's up to you whether you want to figure it out or not.
All right, I'm gonna mute myself.
Oh, God. All right, so now Ryan is muted. So now I can talk crap about Ryan without him being able to say anything about it. I'm going to mention that his shirt looks like a picnic table, something you'd spread over a picnic table, something like that. Does anyone still hear it now with just me talking? It's because your cell phone near your audio interface. I don't. Maybe Ryan does. I don't know. All right, so they still hear it.
Yeah, I don't.
With you muted too.
My cell phone's
so it's
over on the other desk over there.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, we'll just do our best here. All right, Andrew, I wanted to bring up this chart.
All right, let's take a look at a chart. We're going back on track with the local development environment.
Yeah, back on track.
And at some point later, we're going to have to fix our local streaming environment, right?
Yep, we will fix it. So here we go. All right, I'm going to switch over, Andrew, so you...
All right. Well, it was the NY Studio 107 production team. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, you should have slapped a Craftquest logo on it. You bastard. That would have been hilarious. Yeah. Yeah. People are saying audio is gone. You stopped when you switched to screen share. He's going to fix it. Don't worry.
Hey, sorry about that.
So why don't you reintroduce the chart, Ryan?
All right, so here's the chart. We're having all sorts of problems today.
Yeah, so this is a chart prepared by the NY Studio
Andrew's-
107 production team. Yes.
This is Andrew's chart. and he got his staff together. You can't see them. He makes them go sit in the other room while he's recording. And I don't hear the background noise.
Well, that's good. I
But
want to
I'm
make sure
back. I know
people
I'm
can hear.
back. I
All right,
can
you're
see
back.
it.
You're back now. You're back now. And you were talking about you're gonna take this graphic and slap the CraftQuest logo on it. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm gonna put the CraftQuest logo on this. If it's on my live stream, it automatically becomes my IP.
That's fine. You can have it. You can
So-
have it. So yeah, this is just a way that I was trying to like put these different potential local dev environments in different boxes, right? So
Mhm.
we could talk about them from a perspective of, you know, the ones that are similar and the benefits that things that are similar have, and then the differences between them. And I understand, like anytime you try to classify stuff, it's not entirely right, you know? And we'll talk about why the classification isn't necessarily perfect for all of these things.
Right.
But let's take a look at how they're kind of broken down here.
right,
So I
so-
broke them into. Go ahead.
3 groups: raw metal, virtual machine, and containerized. And I think one of the things I asked you when you showed this to me, I was like, oh, like raw metal is like MAMP really raw metal because it has like its own versions of PHP kind of embedded in the app,
Yep.
but it's not. But it's still running on your system.
Yeah, there's no virtualization layer at all, right? So whatever it's using, even though it has its own internal versions of, you know, MySQL or PHP or whatever it is,
Mhm.
those are all still just running like directly on your machine. So I would classify that as a quote unquote raw metal service. And while raw metal sounds really cool, I mean, the real benefits of raw metal are that there is no layer, right? So it's just running natively on your machine. So it's running as fast as it's going to run, you know, as efficient as the code is that is there.
Right.
And in fact, you know, it's one thing Adam Watham, who was involved in the creation of Laravel Valet, I believe, that's one of the things he mentioned in terms of why he wanted to make it. Like he wants a fast response time. You know, he wants when he's typing stuff that it's instantly there. You know, he just can't deal with any kind of delays. And he doesn't want to deal with DevOps stuff, right? So,
Right.
and all of these tools kind of fall into that bucket of run directly on your machine with no virtualization layer at all. And you have used some of these, right? Is that correct?
I have, yeah. I use Valet. That's my go-to right now because it's so fast and easy. You can do secure sites locally really simply. I've used MAMP. I'm not a Windows user, so I haven't used WAMP or XAMPP. Or I guess XAMPP is cross-platform. But I have used MAMP, and I've covered all of these. I actually have a course on CraftQuest for, I think it's called Local Hosting Countdown, something
Yep.
like that. And I kind of went through each one and kind of like how they work and what they are and how to use them in Craft.
Yep.
But I think Valet to me would be like raw metal, right? Because the downside of Valet is that you're running your system PHP version, your system, SQL or whatever the database software you're using. It's already in the system. So if you let's say I do the upgrade to the latest Mac OS in my case, then there's a not small chance that it's going to break some things in Valet because there's things get unlinked. Even though if I use Homebrew, which is really the best combination for Valet and your local system software because it's easier to manage and relink things.
Yep.
But that's the downside. Now the upside is that it's really fast. You can run it easily on an older machine. You don't have to have tons of memory to get it going. It's just a nice interface. I just like the interface, and I can bring up. Everyone can still. Can you see my command line now, Andrew?
I can.
So one of the things I really like is just the the general interface of getting into Valet and being able to see your sites. It's all command line based, so there's no GUI, so that's not ideal for everyone. But just the idea that I can just do Valet link and then a site and then Valet secure and then oops, don't want to do that, and then immediately just it'll generate a self-signed certificate and immediately make my site secure. And then, you can quickly, see which sites, are running on SSL, the URLs and the paths. I just find it really easy. It has just the right amount of complexity and sophistication to be able to do what you need to do. I've not run into a site other than like stuff that has an over-engineered build process that requires like 3 minutes to watch it build before you can edit the site. I've run like tons and tons of stuff through Valet, and I really like it.
Good. So that's wonderful. And I think we need to talk about, yes, Ryan. So I think we need to talk about different types of speed, right?
Okay.
I agree with you. When it comes to the local dev environments, if you're using a raw metal setup, there is nothing that is going to beat it in terms of speed. Like there just isn't. In terms of the time it takes to, run various things or to reload stuff or whatever, you're just not going to be able to beat it because it's running natively on your machine.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are other types of speed. There is the speed with which you can do things like reprovision it. Like I want to use a different version of PHP for this particular site. And I understand that there are tools that you can use to kind of switch between them. But they aren't always necessarily up to date and they aren't necessarily always problem free. In terms of being able to switch it. And they also are typically, well, I think I'm wrong about that actually. I think MAMP does let you tie it to the site, is that correct? The PHP version?
No, see MAMP, I don't think it does. MAMP, I don't think even MAMP Pro does let you.
Okay.
MAMP Pro lets you change the PHP version really easily from the user interface, but I don't think it lets you do it per site.
So it's not a per site thing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And then it's also, and I've never actually used MAMP for development. I've helped people out that are using it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm inaccurate about any of this, hopefully the chat is still there and alive and will correct me quickly. Let me see. Still there? Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
From MAMP.
Okay, so Jeremy's saying for MAMP Pro, you can tie the PHP version to a particular site.
Okay.
But the reality is that you're tied to whatever MAMP ends up providing. And I'll tell you, one of the ways that I measure local development environments is by just casually looking at the DevOps channel every now and again on the Craft CMS Discord.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen lots and lots of questions about confusion in terms of MAMP setup, in terms of where is the version of PHP that it's using. If you're running it from the CLI, by default, it will end up using the version of PHP that's on your machine,
right? Not
the one that's in MAMP that you need, and that ends up being a point of confusion between it.
There's even a Stack Exchange post, or even a post like a comment from Brandon on CraftQuest or somewhere about that, where he says use this because it was so common, such a common problem.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So the issue in terms of speed is not just oh my God, your demo's expired. Right?
Yeah. I was trying to bring it up, but anyway, it's not working.
Yeah. So the issue of speed is not just like, okay, how quickly can I get going with this thing? But at least to me, it is also, how quickly can things be resolved when something goes wrong? And, when it comes to Laravel Valet, for instance, we'll have to talk about the Davenport matter. And the Davenport matter is just how much support that I've seen Jalen give people trying to get things working in Valet. Now, normally getting Valet set up, it's fine. Like, it just works. But when a new version of macOS comes out,
right,
there's always this, horrible scramble where the packages in Brew need to be updated, and then you need to reinstall all of the junk that you didn't have installed before. You need to put all of that back in. You need to tweak things to get it working, and it ends up being a complete nightmare. And I think that's another kind of speed, right? So the speed is not just, how quickly can I use this thing, but how much time do I have to spend configuring this thing and getting this thing working? You know what I mean? I think that matters.
Yeah, it does matter. And so maybe that's where we should move kind of to the next thing, speaking of spending time getting things working.
Oh, I see. We're taking too long. Yeah, and that's my main issue with any of these raw metal services is I personally don't like running any of these development tools on my local machine. I just don't want to deal with. I want the machine to be usable if I blow things up when I'm doing all sorts of horrible DevOpsy stuff,
Right.
you know, or just, you know, a new machine comes, or I get a new computer, or I update the operating system. Like, I just want it to work. Like, I don't want to deal with this thing, you know? And I think MAMP probably insulates you a little bit from that, but you are beholden to them, you know, to come out with updates to make this stuff work. So yeah, let's talk about the second class. So we've got a new entrant in the virtual machine class. So what does virtual machine mean when it comes to local dev environments, Ryan?
That's a good question. So from my standpoint, it would be to where you are in some way like emulating a server environment and then connecting to that. It also, to me, it also means slow and kind of bogs down the machine. I know those are probably generalizations, but I think everyone has at least experienced some of that.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Yeah. So a virtual machine is literally what it says. It's another computer. You can think of it as a server. You can think of it as whatever you want, but it's a virtual one. So it's running. It's kind of like the Russian dolls, you know, where you've got another computer inside of your computer, right? And the benefits about that are that it's completely disposable. Like if you do something horrible and your virtual machine just dies, you can just kill it and make a new one. You know, you don't have to do anything. It also is easier to reprovision. You know, if you want to add stuff into it, it's real easy because you've got your own little VM that you can stuff things into. If you upgrade your operating system, well, the virtual machine that is sitting inside of your machine doesn't care. You know, it has nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter. And the other benefit is something we kind of talked about before, which is that it's closer to production, right? So most of these virtual machines can run the actual operating system and the actual tools that you'll be using on production. So you don't have to worry about, you know, is something weird going to go wrong with this, you know, I was using Apache locally, I'm using Nginx in production, mismatched versions, all that kind of stuff. You don't really have to worry about it. You can match it pretty closely, you know. Now the downsides are, as you mentioned, it's slower. You know, for sure it's slower. And the reason it's slower is there's a virtualization layer to run this computer inside of a computer. And a large part of that is actually not slow due to being CPU bound.
It's memory.
A lot of it is just memory. Yeah, like you want to have a whole bunch of memory because think about it. If you run a virtual machine, you basically are running two machines. So you can think of it in a way that they're sharing all of the RAM that your actual machine has, right? So you don't necessarily need double what you had to start with, but you do want more RAM than would just be okay if it was just your machine on its own, you know?
Yeah, and Andrea says, you know, that she does wish Homestead was faster, and I think anytime I've used any Vagrant stuff, I've had the same feeling. Now, the first one we have listed there is Craft Nitro, and that's new. I did some videos on that, and everyone should check it out. I do feel like now that runs Multipass, so it's not Vagrant based. Multipass is another virtualization engine, and I feel like that Nitro is faster than any time I've ever run like a Vagrant thing, like Homestead. Let's say Nitro feels way faster. It doesn't feel so complicated and heavy. And I don't run, like some of my machines are not like, you know, super powered.
Right.
You know, Luke just said that 32 gigs of RAM helps. The latest beta of Nitro is faster than Homestead in his experience, and some others on the Pixel and Tonic team. And yeah, that's probably right. I think even on, you know, I don't know what my laptop has, but in terms of memory, but it's not maxed out or anything. and I haven't had a
Right.
problem running Nitro, whereas like my experience running Vagrant has been not as great.
So let's talk about it real quick. So Craft Nitro Multipass it's something from Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, and it's basically a way of spinning up Ubuntu instances really easily and quickly. And it is using a virtual, I'm calling it a virtual machine, and it is close enough. It's kind of an in-between-ish
Right.
kind of thing. It's something called a hypervisor, right? And it's kind of like a virtual machine, and I'll talk about the differences with a Homestead in a second. But if you're using the Mac, you're using a hypervisor called HyperKit, for instance, that it's running on. And that is why it might be a little bit faster than Homestead or Vagrant on the same machine, right? Is because it's running this hypervisor layer that's a little bit more lightweight than a full-blown virtual machine. And on Windows, it's running Hyper-V. And I think it's running on Linux. I think I forget what it's called. It's like KVM or something like that. Now, to contrast this with Laravel Homestead, so first of all, Vagrant is what Laravel Homestead runs on. So Homestead is actually it's a Vagrant box, right? So Vagrant is the virtualization layer that takes care of a kind of provisioning the thing with whatever stuff that you want on there. And Vagrant can work with any number of different VMs under the hood. It can work with VirtualBox. It can work with Parallels Desktop. It can even there's even experimental support for having it run on HyperKit if you wanted to. So there are ways that you could try. I don't think it's quite ready for prime time. I haven't used it myself in that way, because when I looked at all the caveats, I'm just like, all right, no, I'm not going to do
Honestly, anytime I have to interact with VirtualBox, I'd rather do something else with my time.
Yeah, I understand. But it's just kind of explaining where these layers are,
right.
And why it's a little bit slower, right? So Craft Nitro, one of the reasons why I think Jason got excited about it and using it is that it is using a hypervisor. So it can kind of give you the best of both worlds in terms of, once they build it out, it'll be able to do everything that you can do on a Homestead box, but on a lighter weight stack, And meanwhile, Vagrant is kind of approaching it from the other angle, that they're working towards getting Vagrant running well on these various hypervisors. So they're kind of both going to be meeting in the middle at some point here, The important point that I want to make here, though, is that Homestead is really just kind of a recipe for Vagrant. And really, when you're running Laravel Homestead, you're running Vagrant. It's just a very specific Vagrant box. It's saying, hey, Vagrant, provision the instance with this recipe that's really, really good for PHP development. And that's really all Homestead is a bunch of packages that someone has handpicked that work really well for PHP development, in addition to some scripts that make certain things easier in terms of debugging and profiling and, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're using Homestead, it really is kind of like someone has handpicked the Vagrant box for you. And eventually, when Vagrant runs well on these various, hypervisors, in theory, you're going to get the same kind of speed out of it that you can with Multipass. In theory. The other benefit of Craft Nitro, however, in addition to the fact that it runs on the hypervisor right now, so it's going to be a little bit faster, also we'll be using less memory, but also the Pixel and Tonic folks can tailor this so that it's going to work really well for Craft out of the box. And I think that is really the big gain for Craft Nitro. In addition to it being faster, it's also that it's a first-party supported solution from Pixel and Tonic that they can make sure that the experience of working with Craft is good,
Right. So if you were just working solely on Craft projects, then like you might want to consider Nitro as your go-to tool if that was really your only the only CMS or software that you were developing on. Let's say you had an agency and you had a fleet of 10 developers that are doing implementations for client sites.
Yeah,
it makes sense to roll out something like Craft Nitro across the entire team so everybody's working from the same thing. and on the
Yeah.
same thing, and it's predictable.
And Luke was saying that he assigns 8 gigabytes of RAM to Nitro, and was asking if I thought that was too much, and I do. I think that's too much. Think about it when you're provisioning a cloud instance. You know, how often are you provisioning? And that's pretty big. And if you are provisioning something that big, it's usually because there's a ton of traffic with a ton of dynamic stuff. When you're doing local development, like it's just you, you know?
Right.
So you want enough RAM in there so that it's not going to be paging. I can't imagine you're ever going to need more than 2 gigs, depending on what you're doing.
So when I was playing and testing with Nitro, I was always setting it to like 1 gig. I was just trying to set it to just a minimum and just see what would happen. There's no real reason to over allocate. I mean, Luke, well, if you have 32 gigs, right, then like you said, he's got plenty left over to make sure that PHP Storm doesn't crash and that Chrome can run.
Well, and that's fine, right? So it's a balance. All I'm saying is that in general, I think 8 gigabytes is probably way more than you need, and you know maybe your OS could use the RAM for caching or for doing other stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
So let's talk about containerized, because this is the one I think is probably like, at least from my perspective, the most difficult to undertake. Maybe you're going to show me otherwise. And then after we talk about that, I want to kind of go back to the poll that I put out yesterday and see kind of where people fall. There's, you know, Twitter only lets me have 4 options, so I couldn't put in everything in there. But so what's the difference between containerized and a virtual machine? Like, aren't containers also virtual machines?
So it's kind of interesting. So the way containerization works. So the basic idea is that in each Docker container, there is one long-running process in it, right? So we're used to servers where we have, you know, PHP is running, MySQL is running, you know, what else? And Redis, you know, all these different things are running. In the Docker world, each of these long-running processes, these services, would be in a separate container, right? So PHP would exist in a separate container, and it would have only what it needs to run PHP, right? The web server, maybe Nginx, runs in a separate container, and it has only what it needs to run, right? It doesn't need a full VM. It only needs the things it needs to run, right?
Right.
And then MySQL, and then whatever else we want to add on. And then what the Docker the container orchestration layers in Docker do is they kind of compose all these containers together, and you end up with a what is kind of like a virtual machine, but it has just what is needed for the exact thing that you're running, right?
Okay.
And it is so the funny thing about Docker is that one of the things that is touted about it is that it's containerization, it's not a full VM, you know, et cetera, which is wonderful, right? I mean, it's obviously going to be much faster if it's running more bare metal and doesn't have this virtualization layer in between it. What they don't tell you is that on the Mac and historically on Windows, though that is changing, the software support needed to run these containers natively doesn't exist, right? So what you're actually doing on Docker Desktop, in the past, you were actually spinning up a VM via VirtualBox, I think is what they were originally using, and then your containers ran inside of there,
right? And
it took care of the magic in terms of mapping everything. Now they have changed it over, so now it is using the same hypervisor that Craft Nitro is using for Docker Desktop for the Mac, and then for Windows, I think it's actually using a native layer. I think that Microsoft is actually more on the ball than Apple is, and they're adding native support for this containerization layer. And I don't develop on Windows, so I'm not 100%, but my understanding is that it actually runs natively on there. But the big difference between the virtual machine and containerized solution is, again, that there are multiple containers and you just kind of put them together. Kind of think of it like a sandwich. You know what I mean? Like, I've got all these different kinds of deli meats and cheese, and what do I feel like eating today? You know, I'm gonna throw some pastrami on, so some salami. I feel like some Swiss, a little mayo,
maybe some kale.
Got my sandwich, and I'm good. What a kale, you know, whatever. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We're gonna make it all soy for you. You know, whatever you need, Ryan.
Well, so but when you do like Docker container, do you get, so virtual machine? I always think about like when my hard drive runs out of space and I have all these massive disk images.
Yep.
Do I get that with Docker as well?
Sort of.
Okay.
What it does is it will cache all of these things for you so that rebuilding them is quick. But if the cache is gone, it doesn't matter. Like, it can still rebuild them. It just is going to be slower,
Right.
So in terms of Docker, like, one of the nice things about it is that they are, the Docker containers are completely disposable.
Right. You just rebuild them.
Yeah, if you want to change the PHP version, you just change one letter, and then do Docker compose up, and you're running the new version of PHP. And if it doesn't work, you change it back, and then you run the next one. The other is that it can match production exactly. You can use the exact containers that you're using in local dev. You can use them in production. There are even services that will just spin up Docker containers. Like AWS has Fargate, where you can be like, here, AWS, serve this Docker container, right? So it is exactly what you're using in local dev is what's in production. Ease of reprovisioning. It basically has all of the benefits of the virtual machines in terms of compartmentalizing the stuff and not having it run on your local machine, but it adds a finer grain of compartmentalization and flexibility putting stuff together.
And there are some tools that make it a little easier, right? You have Laradoc. Somebody brought up on Twitter ddev.
Yep.
I haven't used Lando. Local is, what was that? You said that was called Flywheel?
Correct.
And that's from WordPress. It's basically set up to run. I mean, you can run anything, but it's set up to run WordPress.
Right. Yep. Exactly. So there's Docker, which is like the core technology. And then there are a lot of people that are just like, look, man, like we were saying earlier, like I just want to do my work.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really want to learn Docker. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I want to get familiar with using it, but I don't want to learn how to set all this stuff up. So that's why there's a layer of tools, Laradoc, ddev, Lando, Local. There are probably like 10 others that what someone has done is they've created some really nicely kind of handcrafted Docker containers, just like Laravel Homestead made a nice box for Vagrant, and they're like, okay, you want the benefits of Docker, but you don't want to have to deal with all the garbage of learning everything that has to do with it. Just use this tool, right? And some of them have a GUI on top, some of them have a CLI on top, and that's kind of a nice way to get the benefits of Docker without having to worry too much about it. I can't speak to which of them is better than the other because I haven't used them. I just use Docker directly, so I don't really know.
Let's look at the results of the poll, and then you want to show me how easy it is to get up and running with some Docker stuff.
Yeah, we'll look at the poll, and the reason I think there are a lot of people that have never seen like Docker actually being used, right? And I do think that there's something else to talk about here, which is the benefits to you as a marketable person, right? There are a lot of companies that if you get onboarded with them, their local dev environment is going to be Docker because they have a DevOps team, they have set up Docker containers, and that's just what you're going to have to be using. So having some familiarity with Docker, you're not going to be expected to like set these things up. But knowing how to use them is probably very worthwhile. Like I was onboarded with a client 2 years ago to set up, and it was a Docker environment that we're using to do everything. And this was long before I had set up my own Docker containers, But I had to learn how to get everything set up and run with Docker there. And I think that's something to consider also when you look at these local dev environments. Like, is this thing a skill that I can bring from place to place, project to project? And it's just something to consider. So let's take a look at our poll.
All right, so I wasn't able to get all of my desired options in this poll, so I just said kind of like a MAMP Pro or XAMPP, Docker, Valet, Homestead, which is sort of like in the Vagrant. I realized I didn't put Nitro in there. It's still new, but But so it looks like Valet is really popular. That doesn't surprise me. And MAMP Pro is also almost as equally as popular, which doesn't surprise me. And Homestead and Docker are kind of the ones lagging behind. So this is kind of what I expected. I don't know. How about you, Andrew?
So Docker was actually higher than I thought it would be, but I guess it makes sense when
How many times did you vote? How many accounts did you use?
I don't think I even voted.
Oh, God.
I don't think I voted. I don't think I did. But no, when you take into account all of the other tools that use Docker, and assuming people that use like Lando or DDEV or whatever ended up then voting for Docker, then it makes sense that would be the case. I'm not surprised, right? Because this gets back to what we were saying before, which is that people want to get up and running quickly, and they want to get on with their work, and that's what MAMP lets you do, and that's what Laravel Valet lets you do, right?
Yep.
It's one of those. It's a quick to set up kind of thing, but it also reminds me to some extent of things that I tell my kids sometimes, which is I'm just like, I don't know if you want to touch that, it's going to hurt you. And then the kid just like touches it anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're not going to learn until they actually do it. And what I mean by that is I'm obviously not equating everyone here to kids. So don't cancel me. Nobody freak out. But what I'm saying is that until you have experienced like a complete meltdown using these raw metal tools, you probably never have really been burnt and understand like how horrible it can be.
Yeah.
In terms of when stuff goes wrong, like it goes really, really wrong.
Right. Let's jump into I have the dev mode thing up that you were telling me about.
Yep.
And I know you've tweeted about this, and then I want to circle back around to some questions in the chat and some questions on Twitter that we can answer. But like I've used Docker. Like I think it's overly complex. If I had a full workflow where I was developing locally with Docker with a team, and then we were deploying those containers so that we were developing in the same exact environment that our production is running in, I can totally see it being worth the effort. But you're going to have a hard time convincing me to do it just for local hosting.
I understand. It's probably would be just as easy to convince you to eat a salami as it would, right?
Probably use Docker before I ate a salami. But
yeah, for those that don't know, Ryan's vegan, right?
That is correct.
So I like to tease him about it. But anyway, so let's talk about this. So I'm going to tell you a really, really quick story, and then we're going to get into it. So a lot of people, like, they just want to get up and working, right? They don't want to deal with all this crap. They just want to get up and running. Docker has a reputation for being something that is difficult to learn, or that the investment to learn it is large. And a lot of people that are front-end developers, they're like, I just want to do my work. I don't want to do all this DevOps nonsense, So fair enough. The only thing I would say is that there are different kinds of learning Docker. One is learning how to build your own containers, and the other is using Docker. And I think actually using Docker is actually really easy. And one of the biggest features from my perspective that is amazing about Docker, and is not the case for either of these other two, either any of the virtual machine setups and any of the raw metal setups, is the onboarding. No matter what environment the other person is using, onboarding people is incredibly easy with Docker. Whereas with these other two, both the raw metal and the virtual machine, you're basically just telling people, hey, you're on your own, like set it up and figure out, how to get this thing working.
Right.
Onboarding with Docker is ridiculously simple.
All right, ridiculous. You need to put some muscle behind those words, Andrew Welch. Show me.
I will.
All right.
I will. So the quick story is that, so we've got this podcast called Dev Mode, and it's got a website, and I open sourced it just in case anyone, found anything useful and wanted to see a real world kind of craft site that's out there. And one of our hosts, Jennifer Bloomberg, wanted to get up and running in her local dev environment so that she could work on it and play around with it, that kind of thing. And I think she was using Valet at the time. So she tried to get it up and running, and it didn't work initially because it uses Postgres as a database. It doesn't use MySQL. Okay, so that means, on her machine, there's no Postgres, so she had to do a brew install Postgres to get that installed and working. All right, let's try it again. Doesn't work because it uses Redis as a caching method, so it was dying there. Okay, brew install Redis, get that up and running, right? Tried it again, still didn't work because it also depends on FFmpeg, so it transcodes the audio to provide it. So she had to do a brew install FFmpeg, and that ended up being a royal pain in the ass. And I said to her,
so what started as like a simple idea, like the simplest thing to get up and running, ends up being like there's all these dependencies to get this site working, and now now you're installing like onesie twosie stuff.
Yeah, which sucked, right? And she would have had to do this no matter what she was running, right? Because some of these things don't come by default on every box. Like I think Homestead will come with Postgres and Redis, so that's great, but it still wouldn't have come with FFmpeg. Like we still would have had to install that, right? So the wonderful thing about Docker is that it shrink wraps your entire project in exactly the DevOps that it needs to run. And it does so by way of a simple config file, like a YAML file, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. And so it's a really, really neat thing. So I said to Jennifer, you know what? I wanted to Dockerize this whole setup a long time ago. So I just went and did it, right? And now we're going to show you what it's like to get this real world project up and running. So what we have done ahead of time, as a full disclosure, you have gone down and you've cloned the repo.
I've cloned the repo here at from GitHub, the dev mode repo.
Yep, you cloned it down.
And I cloned it into, let me just, a second here.
Yep.
I've cloned it into this dev mode directory.
Yep.
Right here. And we have everything there. And what else did we do?
So if you do ls-al cms,
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the other thing that we did is we copied the example.env to .env, making no changes to it other than just copying that.
Yep.
Right. And then if you do the go back one directory and then go into the scripts directory.
Yep. We copied example.env.sh just to .env.sh.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And if you're wondering, like, well, how does this work? Like, what about passwords and all that kind of stuff? Why don't you go ahead and do go to the root directory and type more cms/.env.
More cms. Yep.
So here are the settings. So because this is running in a Dockerized setup, like the user is project, the password is project, the database is project. Like, it just doesn't matter.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this can totally be stored in there. It's not an actual password. It doesn't matter. It's in local dev. It makes no difference, right? So let's take a look at what this looks like to actually get this thing up and running. So we're going to need 2 terminal windows.
Oh boy.
So once you open like a split, if you're running iTerm, can you do like a split pane? That would be wonderful.
I think I can. Let's see.
If you right click on the window and there'll be a split vertical.
Look at you. Pro move.
I do it all the time. Yeah. All right. So over on the left in the project root, I want you to do a docker-compose up. On the left.
So docker
dash compose up.
I always write composer up.
I do that too. Yeah. So, and what this is going to do.
The live stream falls apart because my machine fries. All right.
Yeah. Maybe. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the there's a docker compose.yaml file that's sitting in that root directory, and it's going to spin up all of the DevOps that's kind of specified in there, right? And that's it. So in the right pane, why don't you take a look at that, like do more docker compose.yaml. Let's take a look at it real quick.
More docker compose.
Let's hit tab.
I am. It's not working. There it is. All right.
All right. So it's not important that we understand what everything is here, but you see where it says services. So there's an Nginx service. That means it's the web server is Nginx. Every service, remember, is running in a separate container. And then there's a PHP service. Go down a little further. Hit the space bar. It'll just, yeah.
Redis.
So then you've got a Postgres service, you got a Redis service, and then you got a Webpack service. And the Webpack service is something that I made. It uses my Webpack config that I documented in an article, and it runs that in a container. And you get all your hot module reloading stuff, kind of in there, right? So let's take a look at where we are on the left. Where are we on the left? We have our containers up and running. Well, here's how we can tell. So on the right, do Docker container ls. This will show us any Docker containers that are up and running. Yeah, so it looks like we got some Docker containers up and running. This is great. So go into the scripts directory. So the only thing that we need to do before we can actually use this thing is we have to import the database, right? So I wrote a custom little, and you actually see it on the left. You can see the PHP process failing.
Yep.
And if we wanted to, you just scroll up and you would take a look at it. And
this is when I would text you and say, Andrew, it's failing.
No. And we actually did a PR for, it was Urban Trout that did it, actually. He did a PR for Craft that adds a console command that lets us know whether it's been set up or not. And we'll be able to catch this and make it even smoother. But for now, we got to do what I'm about to show you.
Okay.
So do an ls-al. Let's look at the scripts that are in here. So we've got our Docker pull DB, which will pull a database from a remote server, which we're not going to do. I gave you a live DB there that you can import.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to use, you do /docker_restore.
And then the name of it?
And then and then hit return. That's it. And what this is going to do is it's going to take that local database and it's going to stuff it into the running Docker container, and it's going to restore our database. So that's great. So go over to the left.
All right.
And hit Control-C, and this will kill all of the Docker containers that are running. Don't worry, it's done humanely in a free-range, vegan kind of way. It's all right. No processes were hurt in the production of this live stream. Okay. And so this is what it looks like when you spin down these Docker containers. It will do a little thing. It will clean them up. And then we're done, right? So now what we need to do is just spin the containers up again. So just hit the up arrow key. And Docker compose up.
And so in addition to having cloned the repository, I also have Docker desktop running too. We didn't mention that. But that was
I'm sorry.
That's a prerequisite.
The only requirement, that's right. The only requirement for running Docker is that you have Docker desktop installed. So on Mac, Windows, and on Linux, you actually don't even need it. But on Mac and Windows, it's a nice little kind of GUI thing that lets you configure your Docker setup. But that's all you need installed. And this is the wonderful thing about it. And I've done this with people running Mac, Windows with these Docker container setups, the exact ones that I'm showing you, is that all they have to install is that, and then they don't have to do anything else. Like, that's it. Like, they're done. You can get them up and running. You don't have to be like, well, you have to tweak this path on MAMP, or you have to tweak that on Nitro, or this on Home. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't have to do anything, because the entire everything that you need to run this application is shrink wrapped around it in the Docker compose.yaml file. Mm-hmm. Like, that tells it exactly what it needs to run. And it may seem like magic in terms of how it works, but the way it actually works is that people will pre-build containers for PHP, right? So this is everything you need to run PHP. And then for your own project, you just layer it on top of that container. And these are stored up on Docker Hub, so all you have to do is go up there and just, kind of pull them down. And that's it. Like, that's all you have to do to use it. It's really, really kind of nice,
So, let's see, it's still running here.
Yeah, so this is a design decision that I made for these containers, is that every time you start them up, it does a composer install and it does an npm install.
Okay.
And the reason why and that's actually what it's waiting on doing. This is not actually Docker waiting. This is Composer doing its thing. You can see there it's doing the packages. And the reason we did this is that we're working in a team environment where it was better to have the people that were spinning this thing up wait another 30 seconds when spinning it up than it was to have them complain to us that, the latest versions of whatever were not installed,
Right.
And so you can see here it's going through the install. It's running some Composer scripts that's the other nice thing is no matter what environment you're on and no matter what team member you're on, if you do what I'm doing here, you're always running the same versions of all the packages. It's automatically doing a Composer install when you spin it up. It's also automatically clearing all the caches, so you don't have any kind of weird thing going on with it, But that should be it. We should be up and running. Like if you open a browser, you should be able to go to localhost :8000, and you should see something kind of cool.
Dun dun dun. It is not loading, my friend. Is it because I have something else running, maybe? No, 8000 I'm not running anything on, I don't think.
Switch back to the terminal and see if it says anything. Oh, it actually wasn't done.
Okay, still going. There you go. It loaded the site, though. There it is.
Oh, okay, yeah. So take a minute, though. I realize that, whatever, this is like, oh, big deal. You loaded a homepage. The interesting thing about
promoting his podcast again. Sorry.
Oh, for God's sake. Yeah, all the money I make from 0 sponsors in the podcast, right? No, so the interesting thing to note here, though, is that this thing that we have up here, it's running Postgres. Okay?
Luke just said needs more RAM.
Well, look, I mean,
the iMac that I'm running on definitely needs more RAM. So that's
yeah. He's doing this on an iMac that is barely able to do the live stream, let alone anything else. Like we've done live streams in the past where.
Why are you bringing this up?
Matt says just close Slack. No, anyway. Let me get back to it. So the real point here is that to run this site, we have Postgres running, we have Redis running, and we also have FFmpeg running. So when you loaded this page, it actually kicked off an FFmpeg process. Do you see how the player is blank down there?
Yeah, right here.
Right. So the reason it's blank is that there was no transcoded version of the audio for the player to use. So it kicked off an FFmpeg process to transcode it, reload the page.
It's kind of slow.
Yeah, I'm not surprised it's slow. It's running. It's all of the shit that we're doing in terms of the live stream,
Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah, it loaded it back up. We do have an error. That's weird.
Yeah. And this is not, just for anyone who's looking, it's just like, oh man, Docker is slow.
I'm doing a lot here on this machine at the same time.
It's honestly not representative of what the speed is going to be like when you're doing this stuff.
Okay, so this is really cool, and you almost have me hooked.
Hold on. Go. All right, finish.
What you've given me here is the dev mode site. And if I look at the source code,
yep.
Then what's my next step there? Because people really, what they care about is like, okay, Andrew, how do I start using this? This is great. You built this all from scratch, and it's all sort of packaged up for me to use.
Yep.
Can I just clear out the source directory, and then in there just run, Composer create project and create a new craft instance?
No.
What do I do?
So for one thing, let's show them real quick, like do a split screen view of the the browser window along with VS Code, if you're able to do that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So and go to source CSS. Home. Yeah, I don't know. Like not app. So go into components maybe. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at it. Yeah, global.
All right, there we go.
Sure. So here's just some global, HTML rules or whatever. So add like an asterisk rule that is like border 5 pixels red or something. So do asterisk.
Hang on, I'm just looking here. Background. I'm just gonna remove the background image.
Fine. It's probably not going to work because
So if I
it's
save
probably
it,
using the dark one.
oh,
Because there's something on the site where it detects your dark or light preference, and it will use the appropriate one, depending.
let's see. All right, give me something to type in here that you know will work. Then.
That's what I was trying to do. So do star bracket.
Hang on.
Yeah, star bracket, and then just do border colon 5 pix red solid, or whatever the order is on that. Yeah, 5 pix. We want it to be really visible. There you go.
So you're saying it should like hot reload here, right?
So switch back to the terminal just real quick.
Compiling. Oh, it's still compiling.
So what you'll see here is this is the hot module reloading, and again, this is way slower than it actually is when you're not streaming and doing 1,000 other things at once. But whenever a change is made to JavaScript, CSS, Twig templates, any of that kind of stuff, it will actually go in and recompile it, and it will automatically it won't even reload the page. It will just inject it into the page. So if you go back to the web browser, and this is just like the output.
So I have done this on a different machine, not live streaming, and it's really fast.
Right, and the real point here is that all of this is just up and running, and all you typed was Docker Compose up.
Right.
Other than us having to get the database in there.
This is a huge improvement on the site, by the way, just so you know.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. So that's it. I mean, that's all it takes to get Docker up and running. If someone is providing you the containers, which is similar, is my understanding, to the experience of using Lardoc, DDEV, Lando, Local, all of these things, because they have handcrafted the Docker containers for you to use.
How can I use your dev mode repository as a starting point for my own setup?
So the way you would actually do it is you would go to github.com/nystudio107/craft, and that is my craft starter stuff. And that is all Dockerized. So if you wanted to, you could use that. All questions and support that goes along with that goes to Ryan at craftquest.io.
Which is not a real email address, so definitely send that there. Or you can just talk to Luke. He'll always want to help you with that.
But you can actually just do composer, create project, and then you do nystudio107/craft, and that's all the things. Yeah.
I have to do a video on that, Andrew Welch. That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So you wanted to go over the poll or something?
I wanted to go over the poll.
Or some of the questions, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Does anyone have any... We haven't done this yet, so does anyone in chat have any questions about Docker or any of the stuff that we've talked about? And go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, no, all good. Let's see. Hang on, there was a question now. I have to go find them. Here we go. Just going to drop it on this screen here. Brian says, how does Nitro match up to a Forge setup compared to something like Homestead from the standpoint of local matching production? So I know you haven't done a lot with Forge. Oh, with Nitro.
You know more than me about this.
So I would say that you can the granularity you can get compared to like with Docker, where you can actually deploy the containers. And I am not like a multipass expert. So Luke, if you are, you can jump in. Then my initial take is that you could control like the versions of like PHP and MySQL and then make sure that matches what is in production.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't actually be running it in the same environment, which is how you would do it in I don't know about Homestead, but in Docker for sure. Like, do people run? You don't run. Actually, don't know. You don't use Homestead to try to match production environments, do you? I don't think so.
Well, the idea is that Homestead generally, so if you're using Forge, for instance, the provisioning that is on Forge when you spin up a new server is very, very similar, minus the dev tools, to the provisioning that is done via Homestead.
Interesting.
So it's pretty damn close.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is a benefit. And he's basically looking at, my guess is that Brian is kind of like, well, what would it be like in terms of if I swapped out Homestead for Nitro? Would it still be matching my Forge production environment closely?
Right.
And I think the answer is probably it could match it because you can tell Nitro what versions you want. Just as with Docker, you can tell it exactly what versions you want, and you specify those, and it's going to match your production.
A question from Andrea. She asked, how does Docker translate to production? Like, what does that look like, just generally? Because I think it's a whole nother, like getting containers deployed and on production. But what does that generally look like for getting like a Docker container up on production?
So if you don't have a DevOps team, if you're just kind of a person, I would recommend two strategies. So one would be to use served.host, which is a hosting platform from Matt Gray, that everything is Docker and container based, and he spins up Kubernetes clusters and all this kind of fun stuff so you never have to worry about it, and just kind of away you go. The other would be that you can use AWS Fargate, which you basically just give it a container and it will spin it up. So it's pretty slick in that regard.
Yeah, I would say that once you get into deploying containers, you don't have to have a DevOps team, but like it's definitely getting beyond just like the simplicity of like setting up a server with like Forge or something like that.
Believe it or not, AWS Fargate is pretty damn easy to use. You just basically feed it.
I got all day, Andrew. We can fire that up right now. I have nothing else to do.
I've got lots of other things.
It is 90 degrees outside already, and I'm. All right, let's keep going here. I want to look at. So we looked at the poll.
And let me answer Andrea a little bit further.
Yep.
So I agree with kind of where Andrea is going with this, where she's like, well, it would be awesome if I could just deploy my Docker container into production and away you go. Mm-hmm. And you can do that. You can do that using Fargate. You could even do it on your own if you really wanted to like learn all the things you need to know to do it. There's and there are lots of different. There's more than just Fargate. There are other services that do it. There's Served. There's also Amazon has ECS, EKS. There are lots of different ways that this can be done. But what I would add to that is that the benefit of using Docker in local dev really is that you can shrink wrap the project with exactly what it needs. So that when you get a client that only pings you when they need something, you can go back and you can spin up that site and it will run exactly the version of PHP that it needs, and everything will be there and it will all just work. It will never be that your local dev environment, you've upgraded it so this old site doesn't work anymore. You don't have to deal with that anymore. And then in addition, if you ever work with anyone else, getting them up to speed using your setup is trivial. You basically just say install Docker desktop, type Docker compose up, and away you go. And so I think those, even if you don't use the Docker containers in production, I still think that there are strong benefits in terms of onboarding, in terms of provisioning, all that kind of stuff using Docker in production. Now, before anyone says anything, it is going to be slower if you're used to Laravel, Valet, or MAMP or WAMP. Like that's the case.
Right. So on Twitter, Alex replied that he's standardized on Lando, which I think you have on your chart.
I do.
And he says it's faster than Homestead, and like you said, you have more granular control of defining the actual stack. But you don't have to do a lot of like all of the upfront work, like handwriting a Docker compose file and stuff like that. Looks like you linked to an article, so you can check that out. It's in the reply stream to the poll, so you can check that out. Other people mentioned other tools that we didn't cover, like Virtual Host X is another one that Chad Crowell talked about.
That's renamed from something else, right?
What's that?
That's renamed from something else, right?
It might be, yeah, but it's like a MAMP-like tool, I think.
Yeah. But what I wanted to mention before was let's not underestimate that, you get a job from a corporate client and they say, okay, we use a Dockerized environment. Here's, get going. You will have confidence and you can be like, yeah, I know how to do that. You know, that is one of my, you know what I mean? So let's not underplay that either.
So you would make the argument that learning Docker is just a good add-on for your skill set as a developer. It can't hurt you.
I think so, although you probably could live your entire life never having a client that uses that. It depends on who your clients are, you know. But I will tell you that if any of your clients are, you know, decent-sized corporation, you are 100% going to run into Docker setups. 100%.
Right. All right. So we kind of covered the sort of everything from raw metal to containerized. You watched me use Andrew's Docker setup to get up and running locally. It wasn't that difficult. I got, you know, now I can run my own version of dev mode. So I'm starting a podcast called Dev Mode X.
How dare you? How dare you?
So if anyone has any questions, you can drop them into the Discord channel for Craft. We're happy to, you know, answer. I don't know. Is there something in there, Andrew? I don't know if there's even a channel in there for DevOps stuff or local hosting.
In where?
The Craft Discord. I'm trying to think where people can get in.
You have never been to Pound DevOps?
Oh no, I have, but I don't have all the channels memorized. Maybe yeah.
It's Pound DevOps. Yep.
Pound DevOps or hashtag DevOps.
DevOps. Whatever.
I say
your
pound
drug
because
habit. Your drug habit is coming out.
I grew up with phones where you use the pound sign a lot. So
apparently you grew up with hash. So.
You know the company that makes Vagrant, right? Isn't that HashiCorp? So,
yeah, it is.
Yeah,
HashiCorp.
there you go.
Oh,
full circle,
good
man.
Good point.
All right.
Nice callback. I like it.
All right, so I think that's it. Thanks, Andrew, for joining me, and so we can put this together. I hope this was helpful to everyone. Thanks for dealing with all of our technical issues as we're kind of getting back into the swing of things here on some more live streams. This is being recorded, and it'll be live up on CraftQuest as soon as possible, so you can check it out there. And I'll have all the links to things that we talked about. You'll be able to rewatch it and skip past the parts where we have technical issues. All right.
We got to work on our local streaming environment. Right?
Our local streaming environment. Yeah. I need a supercomputer for streaming.
Yeah.
Or you need a fiber connection for your barn.
I'm not moving.
You're not moving? You moved to the city. Come and be my neighbor. There's a house for sale. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Ryan.